Most people believe the White House exists to protect the country. That belief is not accidental. It is reinforced every time a crisis unfolds and the building remains visible, functioning, uninterrupted. As long as authority appears steady, the nation assumes it still is. But that assumption was never shared inside the system responsible for preparing for catastrophe. Within government planning, there were outcomes where the United States did not continue as a working nation. No recovery followed. No return to normal life arrived. Those outcomes were not dismissed as unimaginable. They were treated as scenarios. In those moments, the question was not how to save the country. It was what would still operate if the country could not be saved at all. Which authorities would remain valid? Which commands would still be obeyed? Which version of America would legally persist? These were not rumors or hypothetical fears. They were deliberate frameworks written into policy, maintained across decades, and never designed for public reassurance. The White House did not plan for permanence. It planned for continuity after permanence failed. For most Americans, the White House served as a visual promise. Not a promise of wise decisions, or even competent ones, but a promise that something recognizable was still operating at the center. When uncertainty spread, the building's continued activity suggested that order, however strained, had not vanished. This dependence was learned, not declared. In moments of disruption, the structure did not retreat from view. Statements continued. Schedules appeared intact. Authority remained present, even when outcomes were unclear. The public absorbed a simple lesson. As long as the system looked continuous, the nation must still be intact. Normality became the product being delivered. Not safety, not certainty. Normality, the reassurance that daily life could proceed without redefinition. The White House played its role by remaining visible, accessible, and symbolically steady, regardless of what pressures existed beneath the surface. Over time, that visibility hardened into assumption. Government endurance and national endurance fused into a single idea. If the governing structure remained operational, the country must have survived whatever challenge it faced. Collapse, in the public imagination, could only mean total failure, an unmistakable break where everything stopped at once. There was no room for partial loss in that framework, no shared understanding of a nation reduced in capacity yet still governed. No acceptance that authority might persist even if society itself fractured beyond repair. Anything short of complete disintegration was interpreted as proof that the system had held. Each crisis that ended without visible rupture reinforced the same expectation. Disruption was temporary, recovery was inevitable. Even when consequences lingered, the underlying belief remained untouched. Stability might bend, but it would not fundamentally change. This belief did not come from ignorance. It came from necessity. A population cannot function while constantly preparing for irreversible loss. Daily routines depend on the expectation that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to remain livable. The idea of total collapse had to remain distant, abstract, and unlikely. So, the illusion was maintained with care. Lights stayed on, public rituals continued. Authority spoke in measured tones. Even uncertainty was presented as controlled. The role of the White House was not to resolve every crisis, but to signal that resolution was still possible. That signal mattered more than outcomes. As long as continuity appeared unbroken, collapse could be dismissed as hypothetical rather than imminent. The system's visibility allowed the public to equate presence with protection, routine with resilience, and familiarity with control. This dynamic shaped how danger was understood. Threats were framed as challenges to be met, not conditions to be endured. Disasters were imagined as events to be overcome, not thresholds beyond which normal life might never return. The language of permanence dominated public understanding. In that framework, failure could only exist at the very end. Anything short of absolute breakdown counted as survival. But this public logic depended entirely on what could be seen. It relied on the assumption that authority and capacity were inseparable, that if the system remained visible, it must also remain capable. That belief allowed confidence to persist without verification. It turned appearance into evidence. Inside the machinery responsible for managing catastrophe, the calculation was different. Planning did not assume that normality would always be restored. It did not rely on visibility as proof of control. It did not treat collapse as a singular moment where everything failed at once. Instead, it treated disruption as layered, uneven, and survivable in fragments. Where the public imagined either continuity or annihilation, planners worked within a spectrum. They considered scenarios where communication failed but authority remained, where territory was compromised but command persisted, where society did not recover in familiar form, yet governance continued under altered conditions. This distinction mattered. It meant that collapse was not defined as the end of everything. It was defined as a change in what could be sustained. Loss became a variable, not a verdict. The public was never asked to accept that possibility. It could not. The expectation of normality was too deeply embedded. Trust depended on the belief that the system would either succeed or cease entirely. So the two logics existed side by side. One logic sustained public order through visible continuity. The other prepared for conditions where visibility no longer mattered. The illusion was not a deception, it was a requirement. The country needed to believe that collapse equaled failure, because anything less would have demanded a level of uncertainty that ordinary life could not absorb. That belief made sense to the public. It did not survive inside the system responsible for planning catastrophe. The shift did not come from fear. It came from limits. At a certain point, those responsible for national planning confronted scenarios that could not be solved by speed, scale, or resolve. Some events did not allow correction. They unfolded too quickly, spread too widely, or damaged too many systems at once. In those cases, prevention stopped being a strategy and became a hope. That realization forced a quiet reorientation. Until then, disaster planning assumed a return. Damage was expected, disruption was accepted, but restoration remained the endpoint. Even severe crises were framed as interruptions in an otherwise continuous system. That assumption began to fail when planners worked through outcomes where continuity itself was fractured. In those scenarios, the country did not rebound in recognizable form. Infrastructure did not reconnect everywhere. Communication did not resume uniformly. Social order did not return on a national scale. These outcomes were not treated as anomalies. They were treated as plausible. The central question changed. It was no longer how to stop an event entirely. It became what could still function after it passed. That reframing altered the meaning of catastrophe. Disaster was no longer defined solely by destruction. It was defined by permanence. If conditions after an event could not be reversed, then recovery could not serve as the organizing principle. Planning had to focus on endurance under altered realities. Loss entered the framework differently at that point. It was no longer the marker of failure. It became a factor to be absorbed, something to be calculated, bounded, and worked around rather than eliminated. This did not imply disregard. It implied prioritization. In extreme conditions, not everything could be preserved. Time, resources, and coordination were finite. Choices had to be structured around what remained capable of acting. Survival, once imagined as collective, became conditional. Some functions mattered more than others. The emphasis shifted toward maintaining decision-making capacity. Not because it was morally superior, but because it was structurally essential. Without authority able to issue directives, allocate resources, and establish legal continuity, no broader response could exist at all. This was the first real break from public expectation. From the outside, disaster still appeared as something to defeat. From within planning circles, it increasingly appeared as something to outlast. The difference reshaped how systems were evaluated and prepared. Plans stopped assuming full restoration of territory or infrastructure. Governance was no longer tied to complete geographic control. Authority had to remain valid even if reach became uneven, delayed, or fragmented. This required abandoning a comforting assumption that the nation functioned as a single, indivisible unit under all conditions. In extreme scenarios, it did not. It fractured asymmetrically. Some regions failed faster than others. Some capabilities disappeared entirely. Others persisted in reduced form. Preparation adjusted accordingly. Rather than attempting to preserve everything, planners focused on preserving enough. Enough command to coordinate. Enough legal structure to issue binding decisions. Enough continuity to prevent total institutional collapse. Normality lost its role as a benchmark. The goal was no longer to restore what existed before, but to retain the ability to govern within what remained afterward. As this logic solidified, the gap between public reassurance and internal preparation widened. Public messaging depended on confidence and stability. Internal planning depended on contingency and acceptance of loss. These approaches served different purposes and could not fully overlap without undermining one another. The divergence was never announced. It did not need to be. It existed within planning assumptions, legal frameworks, and operational priorities. Once prevention ceased to be the default outcome, every downstream decision reflected that shift. Authority could no longer depend on comprehensive control. It had to be portable. It had to function with incomplete information, disrupted communication, and degraded infrastructure. Legal continuity had to persist even when enforcement became inconsistent. What emerged was a system no longer built solely to avert catastrophe, but to pass through it intact enough to continue operating. The future, in this model, was not restored. It was inherited under worse conditions. This was the point where internal planning fully separated from public belief. Safety, as commonly understood, implied protection from irreversible harm. Planning no longer assumed that protection was always possible. It assumed instead that harm might be unavoidable, and that governance had to persist regardless. By accepting that some disasters could not be stopped, planners freed themselves to focus on what could be preserved. They identified which functions were indispensable, which could be delayed, and which could be lost without ending authority itself. That acceptance marked the irreversible pivot. From that point forward, planning was no longer about saving the country. It was about preserving authority if the country could not be saved. When prevention stopped being the goal, continuity stepped into the space it left behind. Not as a promise and not as reassurance, as a rule. Continuity was never designed to protect people in the way the public imagined protection. It did not exist to guarantee safety, comfort, or recovery. It existed to answer a narrower, colder question: whether authority would still exist after the country no longer functioned as expected. This distinction matters because continuity was not built around outcomes. It was built around sequence. What had to survive was not society in its familiar form, but the ability to decide, to command, and to transfer authority without dispute. Everything else, population size, territorial reach, institutional capacity, was secondary. In ordinary conditions, authority and population are intertwined. Leaders govern because people recognize them. Laws function because society enforces them. Continuity planning deliberately separated those ideas. Authority was treated as something that could exist even when recognition fractured. This separation is where the discomfort begins. Continuity assumed that the population might be scattered, displaced, or dramatically reduced. It assumed that infrastructure could fail unevenly. It assumed that normal civic life might not return on any meaningful timeline. None of that invalidated authority as long as legality remained intact. Legitimacy did not come from participation. It came from succession. That succession was procedural, not personal. Titles mattered more than individuals. Offices mattered more than character. As long as the sequence was followed, authority transferred cleanly, without requiring public consent or visibility. This is why continuity planning feels impersonal. It was never meant to feel human. The system did not ask whether governance would be effective in restoring life as it had been. It asked whether governance would remain recognizable as governance at all. Could decisions still be issued? Could commands still be acknowledged as valid? Could authority pass from one holder to the next without collapsing into uncertainty? Those questions guided everything. Continuity did not promise protection. It promised command. That command did not depend on scale. Authority did not need to govern the entire country to remain authority. It needed only to remain identifiable, sequential, and uncontested within whatever remained operational. This meant accepting an uneven future. Some regions might remain reachable, others might not. Some institutions could persist in limited form, others would disappear entirely. Continuity planning did not attempt to equalize those outcomes. It adapted to them. The public imagined collapse as total or non-existent. Continuity imagined collapse as layered. That layering allowed authority to persist even as experience diverged. People living under continuity might experience it differently depending on location, access, and circumstance. That variability did not threaten the system. Ambiguity did. Clarity of command mattered more than uniformity of experience. This is why continuity prioritized procedure above all else. Procedure removed uncertainty. It ensured that authority did not fracture into competing claims when conditions deteriorated. Competing claims were more dangerous than loss itself. Loss could be absorbed. Ambiguity could not. Continuity therefore assumed loss without apology. It did not calculate how many could be saved under worst conditions. It did not promise mitigation at scale. It accepted that some thresholds, once crossed, eliminated the possibility of comprehensive response. The focus shifted to preserving decision-making capacity as the final lever of control. Without recognized authority, no coordination could occur. Without coordination, even partial recovery was impossible. Continuity planning treated authority as the last remaining structure once everything else failed. This priority explains why continuity often feels indifferent when examined closely. It was not built to comfort, it was built to persist. It also explains why legality mattered more than effectiveness. Orders remained. Orders even if compliance weakened. Laws remained laws, even if enforcement became uneven. Authority did not disappear because its reach shrank. This logic required a redefinition of survival. Survival no longer meant preserving society as it existed. It meant preserving the mechanism that could govern whatever remained afterward. That mechanism did not depend on prosperity, stability, or public confidence. It depended on sequence. Continuity planning, therefore, functioned as inheritance rather than restoration. The future was not rebuilt from scratch. It was carried forward through compromised structures, constrained authority, and diminished capacity. Authority passed through catastrophe the way assets pass through bankruptcy, reduced, limited, but legally intact. This inheritance model shaped everything downstream. Records mattered, documentation mattered, predefined authority mattered. Anything that introduced uncertainty into succession threatened the entire framework. In extreme conditions, disputes over legitimacy could unravel what remained faster than physical damage ever could. Continuity worked to eliminate those disputes in advance. It specified who remained in charge as conditions degraded. It defined how authority transferred if individuals became unavailable. It established rules that did not rely on communication speed, geographic reach, or public visibility. Those rules were designed to operate even in silence. The public never encountered this layer of governance. It was not meant to be explained or understood. It existed precisely because explanation would be impossible when it was needed. Continuity did not attempt to make catastrophe humane, it attempted to make it administrable. That distinction reframes power entirely. Authority in this framework is not a reflection of society. It is a structure capable of existing apart from it. That does not imply intent to abandon the population. It implies acceptance that the population may not remain whole. Continuity did not choose loss. It prepared to function after loss occurred. By the time continuity became the organizing principle, protection was no longer assumed. Recovery was no longer guaranteed. The only certainty was that authority had to continue or nothing else could follow. This realization sets up the next collapse. Because once authority can exist independently of society, it no longer needs to remain where society expects it to be. If continuity is preserved, what exactly is being continued? The White House is often described as the center of American power. In public imagination, decisions radiate outward from it, authority gathers within it, and control depends on its continued occupation. That image is powerful and incomplete. In the scenarios that mattered most, the building was never meant to remain the center of anything. From the outside, the White House functioned as a fixed reference point. It anchored confidence. As long as it appeared active, the system appeared intact. This visibility served a purpose. It reassured the public that leadership remained present and reachable, that governance had not fractured beyond recognition. But visibility was never the same as centrality. Within internal planning, authority was not treated as something that had to stay in one place. It was treated as something that had to remain valid, transferable, and operational under changing conditions. Physical location was secondary. Continuity depended on movement, not permanence. This distinction undermined the idea of a single, immovable seat of power. In extreme conditions, remaining in one location increased vulnerability rather than control. Concentration invited disruption. Fixity created risk. The logic of survivability favored dispersal, redundancy, and relocation over symbolic presence. The White House in that framework was a starting point, not a destination. Public expectation placed power inside the building. Planning logic treated the building as one node among many, useful for signaling stability, but unsuitable as a final anchor during catastrophic disruption. Authority could not afford to be tethered to a single structure when infrastructure, communication, and security were uncertain. This was not a rejection of symbolism. It was an acknowledgement of its limits. Symbols function best when conditions are stable enough to recognize them. When conditions deteriorate, symbols lose clarity faster than systems do. Planning, therefore, prioritized systems that could operate without relying on public recognition or physical landmarks. Authority had to be portable. This portability did not mean improvisation. It meant preparation. Governance had to function across changing environments, reduced connectivity, and incomplete information. That required a framework where legitimacy traveled with roles and procedures, not with buildings. The White House was never designed to provide that flexibility. It was designed to be seen. That visibility mattered in normal conditions. It created a shared point of reference. It allowed continuity to be communicated visually, even when certainty was lacking. But in scenarios where communication faltered or access became restricted, visibility lost its value. Planning reflected that reality. The system assumed that at some point, remaining in the building would no longer serve governance. Whether due to security threats, infrastructure failure, or operational constraints, authority had to be able to detach from its most recognizable symbol without losing legitimacy. That assumption ran directly against public expectation. From the public perspective, abandoning the White House would signal collapse. From the planning perspective, remaining there could accelerate it. The two interpretations could not coexist, which is why the planning logic was never meant to be visible. The building's role was therefore paradoxical. It was essential for maintaining confidence, yet unsuitable for sustaining authority under worst conditions. It functioned as a stabilizing signal while the system prepared to operate beyond it. This dual role explains much of the tension surrounding the White House's symbolic status. It was treated as indispensable in public narrative and expendable in internal logic, not because it lacked importance, but because its importance was limited to perception. Planning did not require the building to survive intact. It required authority to remain coherent. That coherence depended on predefined transfers, not fixed geography. If authority could relocate without dispute, legitimacy remained intact. If it could not, confusion would follow regardless of where it was physically located. This is why internal frameworks emphasized continuity of roles rather than continuity of place. Offices mattered, procedures mattered, documentation mattered. The physical structure did not. In degraded conditions, geography becomes unreliable. Transportation is interrupted. Communication is delayed. Access routes change unpredictably. A system that depends on reaching a single location becomes brittle under those circumstances. A system that allows authority to move remains functional longer. The White House, by its nature, could not provide that resilience. It was never meant to. Its strength lay in familiarity, not adaptability. It conveyed stability through permanence. Planning required stability through flexibility. Those goals diverged as conditions worsened. This divergence explains why remaining in the building was never the endpoint in continuity planning. The endpoint was never a place. It was a state, authority that could continue issuing decisions without ambiguity. Once that state could no longer be guaranteed from within the White House, the logic dictated departure. This did not represent abandonment of governance. It represented its preservation. The public often associates departure with defeat. Planning associated departure with survivability. Staying put for symbolic. Reasons offered reassurance, but it did not offer control. Control required the ability to reposition, reorganize, and reestablish command under changing constraints. That requirement stripped the building of its assumed centrality. The White House remained important as long as it could perform its signaling function. Once signaling lost relevance, the system's priorities shifted decisively toward mobility and redundancy. This shift reframes the building entirely. It was not the engine of power, it was the interface. It connected authority to public understanding under stable conditions. It was never intended to contain authority when conditions destabilized beyond repair. This distinction is easy to miss because the building is so visible. Visibility creates the illusion of centrality. Planning logic works in the opposite direction. It assumes that what is most visible is also most vulnerable. Authority, to survive, had to become less visible. This does not diminish the White House's historical role. It clarifies it. The building was essential to maintaining confidence, not to ensuring continuity under catastrophe. Those responsibilities belong to different layers of the system. Once catastrophe crossed certain thresholds, symbolism gave way to survivability. That handoff was never meant to be observed. The public-facing narrative required the building to stand as long as possible. The internal framework required authority to be able to move the moment standing still became a liability. This is where the title becomes unavoidable. The White House was never the final seat of power. It was the last place authority needed to be seen before it stopped needing to be seen at all. In the scenarios that mattered most, the White House was designed to be left behind. No suspense music, no drama, just certainty. By the time authority detached from protection, prevention, and place, one truth had already asserted itself. Power was no longer human-scaled. It did not depend on the character of those who held it, the approval of those who recognized it, or the territory that once defined it. It depended on sequence. Individuals were always temporary, roles were not. Leadership changed hands by design, offices transferred by rule. Decisions continued to be issued not because they were trusted, but because they followed an order that could not be interrupted without consequence. This was not a weakness of the system, it was its strength. Over time, belief proved unreliable. Confidence fluctuated, legitimacy eroded and recovered. None of that altered the underlying mechanism. Authority did not wait for agreement, it proceeded. This is where continuity becomes inheritance. Not inheritance of wealth or blood, but of procedure. A chain passed forward without memory, sentiment, or attachment. What mattered was not who governed, but that governance remained identifiable and undisputed. As long as succession remained intact, authority remained real. Public faith was never treated as durable. It was assumed to rise and fall with circumstance. The system did not require it to persist. It required only that the next step be recognized as valid by those positioned to act on it. Even the nation itself was conditional. A country is land, people, and shared recognition. Continuity planning did not assume those elements would remain whole. Borders could shift. Populations could fragment. Shared understanding could dissolve. None of that automatically ended authority. Authority was not tied to completeness. It was tied to continuation. This distinction is easy to miss because public life treats governance as inseparable from national wholeness. Continuity treated wholeness as optional. The mechanism could function with less territory, fewer people, and diminished capacity. It did not require a return to what existed before. It required only that something recognizable as authority remained. That requirement stripped power of sentiment. The system did not promise restoration. It did not promise protection. It did not promise fairness or comfort. It promised that command would not disappear into uncertainty. That promise mattered more than outcomes because uncertainty invited contest, and contest invited collapse. Procedure prevented both. This is why continuity feels cold when examined closely. It was not designed to mirror lived experience. It was designed to outlast it. Where experience varies, procedure remains fixed. Where recognition falters, sequence holds. Over decades, this procedural inheritance outlived every visible change. Leaders rotated, parties fractured and reassembled, public narratives shifted. Authority absorbed each transition without altering its core logic. It did not need loyalty. It did not need enthusiasm. It did not need belief. It needed compliance with order. This is not domination in the theatrical sense. It is persistence without spectacle. Power that does not announce itself, persuade itself, or justify itself. Power that moves forward because it can. In this framework, continuity is not a safeguard for the public. It is a safeguard for authority itself. It ensures that governance does not dissolve simply because circumstances become unrecognizable. It ensures that decisions can still be made even when consequences cannot be fully managed. That assurance redefines what survival means. Survival is no longer measured by prosperity, stability, or recovery. It is measured by whether command can still be issued without dispute, whether legality can still be traced through a recognized chain, whether the system can still act, even if the world it governs has changed beyond recognition. This is the final removal of comfort. Protection is gone. Recovery is gone. Wholeness is gone. What remains is governance without guarantees. This is not a moral judgment. It is a structural reality. The system was built to endure conditions that belief could not. It accepted loss as a condition of persistence rather than a sign of defeat. The dynasty did not need permanence. It did not need consensus. It did not need a country as people once understood it. It needed only to continue. These puppy lawns were never written to reassure the public. They were written to ensure that authority could still exist, even if the country it governed did not. Power does not always collapse when a nation does. Sometimes it simply continues, quietly, procedurally, without needing to be seen. If this documentary changed how you think about authority, continuity, and what truly endures, let me know in the comments. Tell me what story you want next. Another hidden system of power, another dynasty that outlived belief, or something you think no one is willing to examine honestly. This is Gilded Dynasty, and this was never just about a building.